Hello and welcome to The Download from Wise Woman and Wordsmith, where insight meets inspiration. A space for creatives, dreamers and visionaries ready to spark new ideas, ignite purpose and reimagine possibilities. Here we share downloads of wisdom, stories and strategies to help you thrive in your creative journey. I'm your host, Jill Marshall. Tune in, connect and let the magic unfold.
Show you tomorrow.
Hello and welcome to The Download, where we explore creativity and the moments of insight that shape our work. I'm Jill Marshall and we're here today to talk about something that can make or break a creative project, and that's its name. Because a name or title is more than just a label, it's the first impression, it's the energy signature, and sometimes the deciding factor in whether people engage with your work or not. So how do you find the right name? Can inspiration strike like a lightning bolt, or is it a slow burn process? And what are the pitfalls to avoid? Let's dive in. So the magic of a name and how they come to us in the first place. This has been uppermost in my mind since I started this podcast and another for a client. The Download title came to me in, well, a bit of a download, whereas the name for my client's podcast, That Retail Property Guy, was the result of some brainstorming, some feedback and advice, or what we might call beta testing, and a bit of recognising the hit when we'd landed on the right one. As we named it, the whole project took off and gained a new energy and momentum. Same with this podcast. So names and titles can emerge in many ways. Some come in a flash of inspiration, like this one, in a download. Others need careful crafting, refinement, and even market testing. Here are some real-world examples. The name and the character of Harry Potter reportedly came to J.K. Rowling fully formed during a train journey. It carried the energy of the entire series before she even wrote the books. And then there's a dream manifesting a name. Paul McCartney apparently dreamed the melody of Yesterday before it became one of the most famous songs in history. Sometimes a title or name can come to us in that sort of half-asleep state when our conscious mind isn't blocking creative flow, and so it was with Yesterday. And then there are names that needed a change. Did you know, for instance, that Google was originally called Backrub, not exactly the tech giant brand we know today, or that Pride and Prejudice was originally called First Impressions? Sometimes a name change is essential to make something more memorable, marketable, or meaningful. And sometimes there's a title that didn't fit to begin with. So here's a tale of one of my books. When Jane Blonde's sensational Spylet was first published, someone in the know in the publishing industry told me that I had the best title of the year. He seemed to be right. JB sold very well. But book titles can be hit-and-miss affairs, and not all are created equal. Some are born, like Jane Blonde, some are created for mass-market appeal. Some, I've discovered, are actually made backwards. So that first major title, Jane Blonde's sensational Spylet, I came up with myself with some help from Ian Fleming. Then, through the writing of the 7-book Jane Blonde series and a World Book Day novella, I became accustomed to chucking around ideas for titles with my publishers, who were Macmillan Children's Books. Sometimes I'd suggest the title up front before I started storytelling. Sometimes we'd toss it around between us as the book neared completion. Occasionally, and this was the case with Golden Spy, they'd suggest a title and ask if I could match the story to it. They were wonderful titles, and I loved every single one, as it fits the book brilliantly from contents to cover. It was much the same with the Doghead books, so when they asked me to write a new girl series and gave me a theme to consider, I had no hesitation in coming up with the most original theme-based story and character I could conjure up. I pitched a new series called, in my mind, The 9 Lives of Matilda Peppercorn, with each individual book named after a breed of cat. We all loved the concept, the early chapters, and the fun new character. Series bought, contract signed, job done. It was only later, once the first book was fully drafted, that I discovered in a random conversation what the publishers were now calling the book and the series. Cat Girl, they said. What now? I said. And then, no, I said. I hated it. At that time, it just didn't feel like my book. So the publishing engines honestly ground to a halt, and over several months, we battled with the title. Now, Macmillan tried very, very, very hard to make it work. They really did. They even brainstormed a new title that didn't mention cats. Unfortunately, I loathe that one even more than Catgirl. It would literally give me a sinking feeling when I mentioned it. I know they were committed to that name because I accidentally found it on Amazon in a placeholder a few years ago. But I couldn't live with a title for my beloved characters that honestly made me feel nauseous and stare at my feet in embarrassment whenever I talked about it. And so, heartbroken on both sides, I believe, because publishers didn't and don't make these decisions lightly, and with an exchange of some dramatic emails, I pulled out of the deal. Possibly complete madness to back out of a multi-book contract with a major publisher over what was, on the surface of it, just a difference of opinion over a name. The other part of me, though, knows it was the right thing to do, because what I was really challenging was not the title, but my creative freedom and the ability to take my character and story in a direction that nobody knew was coming, not even me, although I could sense it. Even at that time, I could feel that this crazy blue-haired girl would take me down creative trails I'd not even dreamed of, on important themes I hadn't yet imagined. You see, the reason I didn't originally like the name Catgirl was because that's not really all that she is, and I knew that if I went along with it with only one book written, I wouldn't be able to write the rest of Matilda Peppercorn's story in the way I wanted to. Correction, she wanted to. Non-cat sections would be edited out. Bigger storylines that strayed into the unknown would be steered in a different direction. Effectively, and I don't blame them for this as this is what publishers have to do, my beloved character and her stories would become a product, and I'd have to go where the market and market forces sent me. Back then, I could only really mumble that it wasn't quite where she was going, and while I didn't know exactly where that was, I knew it wasn't down a narrow channel sized and shaped for a specific market segment. Writing it true was more important to me than writing to be published, even if that meant, and it did, significant pain, hurt, and loss of income for all parties concerned. In a way, though, this couldn't have happened at a better time. It was the growth of indie publishing. With varying degrees of success and even more extremes of failure, I published the first Matilda Peppercorn book under one title and then another, trying to find and feel the one that best reflected the story and the brilliant girl at the heart of it. I toyed with calling it Tilly and the Whatever, but then another series with that title came out, published by my own former publisher, no less. It's my belief that ideas often float around, waiting for a co-creator, and this time they got there first. No biggie. I shrugged and moved on. And in the meantime, I just kept writing. I wrote that girl's adventures of magical mayhem in the way that they wanted to be written, as big, chunky novels, which I'm told girls don't read anymore, as bonkers tales of friendship and family, as mad, epic, mystical journeys, as an interweaving history of a girl who's a legend in her own lifetime and beyond. And that's what it finally became, a 4-book series charting the legend of Matilda Peppercorn, saviour of witch kind, and much, much more. It's a quartet of large, zany novels that are not short as the market requires, but I had to finish the story for my own satisfaction and for Tilly's sake. I recently saw a quote from Mindy Kaling that said, "Write like you own the room." Well, Matilda Peppercorn owns the room and pretty much writes herself. Which is when I finally opted to go back to that original name that Macmillan wanted for the Matilda Peppercorn series, Catgirl. Why? Well, because in that particular book, the first in the quartet, it turns out that's what she is. It then provides a tag or a nickname for her throughout all the books, because now that I've completed the whole thing, I know she can't get stripped of her other considerable powers to fit a certain notion of who she's meant to be. Because now it feels right. I know my characters more by how they feel than anything else, and I just know that Tilly would approve. In the beginning, not so much, but now superbly excellent. And also because the time is right. I'm not sure the world was ready for a mixed-species kickboxer, defending witches, women who are fearless leaders and intuitive healers, magical, misunderstood girls and boys, cats and trees and other creations, all against the mindless bigotry of the patriarchy, but it sure is now. And the other reason I called it Catgirl is because, above all else, Matilda Peppercorn is just herself, divinely and haphazardly, and with flaws and claws galore, and because I'm just myself too, a writer, a creative, a storyteller who just needed to finish the tale that had grown within me in whatever fantastical directions it wanted us to go. So, that might be a lesson in what not to do when naming. The answer is don't get too hung up on it. Sometimes playing around with a name or title can stop you getting on with the actual project itself. As creatives, we often don't need much of a reason to procrastinate, so make sure that your title isn't one of them. And here are some common pitfalls to avoid. Number 1, making it too complicated. If people can't pronounce it, spell it, or remember it, you've got a problem. Keep it simple and clear. Number 2, being too generic. A name that's too vague or overused can get lost in the noise. Think of how many projects have titles like The Journey, New Beginnings, or Awaken. Be specific. Now, I know I've probably broken that rule with the download, but I have added my own name to make it clearer who it belongs to. And I'm honestly very prepared to change it again in the future if needs be. A third pitfall, ignoring your audience. What resonates with you might not connect with the people you want to reach. Test it out with friends, peers, or even potential customers. As discussed in my episode on how ideas come to you, my adult psychological thriller for Penguin was commissioned on just the title, that title being The Most Beautiful Man in the World. He's very far from beautiful, of course, and I do sometimes wonder if it might be better called The Narcissist, or even these days, men like Donald Trump. And number 4, not checking availability. Ensure no one else is using your desired name by checking directories, Google's social media handles, and domain availability. As an example, another of my adult novels published with Penguin was almost ready to go to print, named as Solo by Jill Marshall, when the marketing team discovered another book called Solo by Jill Mansell. Now, while I wouldn't mind Jill Mansell's book sales, we could all foresee some issues with this, so I quickly, very quickly, came up with the new approved title, The Two Miss Parsons, which actually I now think suits the book far better. And while we're talking about this topic of checking names, I should bring up the issue of copyright. Not many people know that for the most part, and for various reasons, you cannot copyright the title of a book, movie, or song, and probably a podcast. Now, I know this boggles the mind, that you could sit down and write a new book called Atonement, or Goosebumps, or Middlemarch, and there's not much anyone could do about it. When the first couple of Jane Blonde books had been published, a film writer in the States sent a sort of cease and desist letter via her legal team saying that she'd come up with the name of Jane Blonde for a girl spy movie, and she talked about it at various events, so I must have heard her and taken the name. My publishers and I pointed out that she's called Blonde simply because it rhymes with Bond, as in James Bond, also a spy. And also that I had 2 completed original works with a variety of characters, plots and gadgetry that were all my own creation, and that actually I'd never heard of her or heard her speak. That claim really just disappeared. However, it did alert me to the question of copyright, because what was then to stop someone else taking the name? So I did what my publishers recommended, which is to trademark the name. If you're writing a new book called Harry Potter or Hercule Poirot, please remember this distinction. Trademark protects and copyright might not. And don't forget, of course, that if you're collaborating with creative partners, they might also want to have a say in what the works are named. It's always good to be firm on what needs to stay and flexible on what can work for you towards the greater good. So with all that in mind, how do you land on the perfect name? Here are my top 3 tips. Firstly, feel into the energy. A good name should feel aligned with the essence of your project. Say it out loud, write it down, and see if it sparks something in you. Sometimes it feels very satisfying, like a great meal, and at other times quite exciting and shimmery. If it gives you a heart-sink moment, it's not the name for you. Secondly, play with word combinations. Mash up words, use alliteration, or borrow from mythology, history, or different languages. Think of names like Airbnb, Air and Bed and Breakfast, or Nike, Greek goddess of victory. The guy I mentioned who told me I had the title of the year in Jane Blonde also liked the title Vampirates, which I do too. It's very clever and it's memorable. And thirdly, test and adapt. Don't be afraid to refine. If your name isn't landing, tweak it until it does. Many best-selling books, movies, and hit businesses went through multiple name changes before finding the right one. So, whether your next title arrives in a dream, a download, or after 100 sticky notes and brainstorming sessions, remember, the right name is out there. Stay open, trust the process, and craft a title that carries the energy of what you want to bring into the world. I already know the name of my next novel before it even starts to form. I'm trademarking it as we speak. Thanks for tuning in to the Download podcast. Feel free to like, comment and share and all of that good stuff. And for more about my books, coaching and business services, please check out wisewomanandwordsmith.com.